Hello, everyone. I'm Renee Vander Avord, Assistant Curator of Canadian Art at the Art Gallery of Ontario. We are connecting in virtual space, but I would like to begin with our land acknowledgement. The AGO operates on land of the Anishinaabe-Mississauga Nation and was also the territory of the Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The Dish with One Spoon Wampum Covenant is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. I am delighted today to introduce our guest speaker, Molly Peacock. Molly and I are going to speak about two very exciting turn-of-the-century Canadian artists, Mary Hiester Reid and Helen McNicoll, both of whom are featured in a new exhibition at the AGO called The Open Door. As part of our close-looking series, Molly will be analyzing 3 paintings by Mary Hiester Reid, and I will take a close look at 3 works by Helen McNicoll. We will conclude with a brief comparative discussion. To begin, I'd like to introduce Molly. Molly Peacock is a biographer and poet. She is a fellow of the Leon Levy Center for Biography and the author of 2 biographies, The Paper Garden, Mrs. Delaney Begins Her Life's Work at 72, which was named a Book of the Year by The Economist, The Globe and Mail, Booklist, the London Evening Standard, The Irish Times, and the Sunday Telegraph, and the forthcoming Flower Diary, Mary Hiester Reid paints, travels, marries, and manages a life in threes. Peacock's latest poetry collection is The Analyst Poems from Biblioasis Press. She spent the last 8 years writing and researching her biography of Mary Hiester Reid, thanks to fellowships from Access Copyright Canada and the Canada Council of the Arts. Although many biographers tire of their subjects, that's not the case for Peacock, who feels that Mary Hiester Reid is a vital role model for all who attempt to lead creative lives and manage to be married too. With that, I will turn it over to you, Molly, for a close look at the work of Mary Hiester Reid.
Thank you so much, Renee. I'm delighted to be talking about Mary Hiester Reid, painter, traveler, and wife. With over 300 paintings and a lifelong commitment to a partner, she opened a door into the almost impossible to balance world of love and art. Mary Augusta Catherine Hiester Reid was born in 1854 in Reading, Pennsylvania, and died in 1921 in Toronto. Now here is Mary in her Paris studio. And you're going to see that shortly.
There it is.
Here it is. About several years after she married Canadian painter George Reid. Now take a good look while I tell you a little bit about her life. She made a crucial decision in 1883 to leap into real painting, not just ladies' watercolors. Take a look at her palette and the number of brushes she has in her hand. As you look around her studio, know that she'd grown up in Beloit, Wisconsin, on nearly the same latitude as her future husband in Wingham, Ontario, with just her older sister and her intrepid mother, who moved the girls from Pennsylvania to Wisconsin on the brink of the Civil War after their father had died. So take a look at that cassone or marriage chest she's sitting on. That huge carved chest is still in her house today. When her mother passed away, Mary and her sister went back to the Philadelphia area around the same time as that George Reid, who was 6 years younger, was battling it out with his farmer father because George wanted to study painting at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, led by the brilliant American painter Thomas Eakins, who was encouraging women to paint in oils. So at this electric moment in art history and in personal history, Mary and George were hurtled into one another's presences. They fell in love, got married at graduation, and sailed on a budget steamship line to Europe. So as you see her in this photograph, Mary has made 3 radical decisions in her life. The first, to be a painter. The second, to be married and continue to paint. And the third, to travel. So let's make a leap all the way to 1912 to a painting called A Fireside. Here's a fireside painted when she is 58 with a well-established career. She's a player in the Canadian art world who brings the art of Canada to international exhibitions, and she shows yearly at the Royal Canadian Academy of Arts. She's made 5 transatlantic voyages, almost always stopping in Spain to see her sister, who became a nun. Now, take a look at the right side where you see a copy of a Velázquez painting. It's a bit dim, but I think you can make it out. And I'm wondering, Renee, if you could, because I don't think that I can point with my cursor. Can you point out? Yes, there we go. There's a copy of the Velázquez. His colors were hugely influential for her, and she wrote about this for Massey's magazine, which was a new cultural platform in her day. She said that Velázquez never gave you, quote, a suggestion of paint, unquote. And her favorite painting was Las Meninas, which she said was, quote, full of character, even down to the dogs, unquote. So just let's take a look at that fireside itself. When an artist portrays her studio, it is a form of self-portraiture. But notice there's no easel here. She's painting her hearth inside her studio at Upland Cottage in Witchwood Park, the arts and crafts fantasy of a house designed by George for 2 working artists in what was called a companionate marriage. Now, her husband's studio was gigantic. It was big enough for these huge murals that he did. And Mary's comfortable studio, as you can see, with its cozy ingle nook, led, of course, to the dining room and the kitchen. This is a painting of an interior about interior life. Mary's mantra, I went cheerfully on with my task, wasn't a superficial one. When she wrote that, it was the motto of a person who processed her being through portraying states of mind as they were revealed to her through objects such as these and through the natural world. You can see there the copper tea kettles that she used. They still exist. And notice those pillows in sensuous arrangement there on that bed-like bench. 2 pillows of one pattern, 1 pillow of that sort of mellow orange. And next to those pillows are paper white narcissus bulbs in a ceramic bowl. They're usually in bloom in January, so we think maybe it's snowing outside of this painting. And in the next detail, you can see that above the fireplace are her talismanic objects, books, an Asian bowl that she painted many times, metal objects that she brought back from her painting trips. That fireplace mantle, those shelves, all made by her husband. And in the next detail, you'll see a Japanese print that she brought back from Paris, and which we'll see again in another couple of minutes in another painting. You should also know that this is the room where she gave away her husband. That hearth, you take away that H, there's heart, and just remember that as some heart trouble comes into her story. So now let's take a look at an atmospheric painting called A Study in Grays. Now, she may have titled it Grays, but she packed this one with subtle built-up color. These, there are delicate pinks. Maybe, Renee, you can run your cursor over those pinks at the top. It's at the roses on the top there. It's kind of like pink lingerie beneath a pale gown there. There's blues, like 5 o'clock shadows that fortify that jug, and the side, the rim of the pewter plate. Layer after layer of these understated colors build up the grays. Mary was gray and about 60 years old when she painted this. And she took a tonalist painting technique and made it her own with a realist touch. She derived this style from the much admired by her James McNicoll Whistler. Tonalism is an approach that takes its impulses from music or tones and attempts to paint emotions through times of day, like sunrise, twilight, or weather like fog and rain, all the indistinct moments and often gray weather that here become internal weather, because this is an interior, unusually for a tonalist painting, that kind of weather that's often called poetic. And Mary was a reader of poetry. So now, the aesthetic bombshell here is why you have not heard the name of this extraordinary still life and landscape painter. A Study in Grays is dated 1913, and that is the year of the Armory Show in New York City. So then Duchamp's Cubist painting, Nude Descending a Staircase, set off an earthquake in the art world, and received narrative says that modernism was officially born in North America in this year. But Grays, A Study in Grays, looks nothing like Duchamp. Mary had zero interest in the hard abstraction of modernism. Her interest was in feeling and in time. That does not mean she was retrograde. She was one of a handful of women tonalist visual artists, along with the photographer Gertrude Casebeer, the British painter Don Proctor, who foreshadowed the atmospheric techniques of 20th century photographers like Edward Steichen and Alfred Stieglitz. With her smooth stroke paintings suggestive of interior states, described in musical terms, Mary espoused a way of painting that, while it precursed the avant-garde, also was becoming passé before her very eyes, superseded by the all-male Canadian group of 7. Now let's take a deeper look at this painting with the next slide. There's that great sturdy pewter plate made of masculine metal, and I'll see how it backs, it almost sponsors both the large, curvy, feminine blue jug and the smaller, curvy gray vase. Look how the shiny gray vase in front has 3 roses, optimistically upright. It steps out like the youthful offspring of the plate in the vase, or of the plate in the jug, and then in back of that vase you see that substantial midnight blue jug with its 3 roses, only they're different. 2 are upright. In the neck of the opening, that catches them the way corsets catch the waist of a woman. And then 1 rose is trailing behind, fainting behind. And you can see this, but if Renee wanted to guide her cursor over there, that would be great so that we can see that rose. Now, if it seems overdetermined, to cast these objects as three people. It's just good to be reminded that such objects were, as part of domestic life, viewed in human terms in the late 19th and early 20th century. A milk jug was a her. A whiskey jug was a him. Metal objects were masculine. Ceramics, feminine. This is a bi-gendered world. So let's go on to maybe take a closer look at one of the roses, and you can see how Mary is painting the light into the vase and into each petal of the rose in this combination of realism and atmosphere, emotional atmosphere. You know, she suffered from angina at the end of her life, and she had a number of painful attacks. And the painter Marion Long and a younger painter named Mary Evelyn Wrench, who had been a student of both George and Mary, but more of George, came to visit her. And Marion Long says that Mary Hiester Reid says to the young Mary, 25 years younger, George will be needing a wife. Now she's saying this to this younger painter who was very talented, winning accolades on her own. They had taken her along to their summer place and an art colony in the Catskills, where they received students there. She'd studied with George at what's now known as OCAD University. George will be needing a wife, Mary says with literal heartache. And I think, she says, it should be you. 8 months later, after Mary Hiester Reid died, Mary Wrench married George Reid. So just before we leave this painting, let's take a look at a botanical detail. Here's the palpable sense of that pewter and the palpable sense of the leaf. And one of the reasons I love this work is that it's so difficult to get a lucid realism and that evanescent sense of our unconscious daydream worlds. And just to get back to the biography, it's worth noting that she painted this work just as her husband, who'd built a house for her, was building a house next door for his next wife, Mary Wrench. Okay, let's go to a final painting, Chrysanthemums, a Japanese arrangement. Now, arrangement is the key word here because Mary set this still life up about 1895, and she positioned her Japanese print, the print of the kabuki actor, on a wall. And then below this fierce gray warrior in the middle of the painting, look how she placed the clutch of chrysanthemums, the flower of autumn, maturity and wisdom. And notice that the mums are falling from the mouth of a blue and white ginger jar featuring 3 wise men. Now, take a look at the brushwork and the palette of deep colors. The whole painting is a statement of strength. The images of warrior power above and contemplative wisdom below, and a central bouquet of hardy blooms that traditionally symbolize maturity in both East and West. They're nodding vigorously from those yellow centers. Now, Mary was very much aware of the language of flowers and very much aware of her Asian influences as she embraced what we refer to as Japanisme in this painting. Let's take a look at the flowers in the next detail. And here's a closer look at the brushwork. Notice that each petal is evoked by just a single vivacious stroke, each dash creating a petal it's assured. It gives a sense of rapid painting. It's a flat brush, and there's no fussiness here. And take a look at the next slide. Here is that Japanese print, probably by one of the artists signing himself Utagawa Kunisada. And notice the two cartouches in the print, and you might point those out, Renee, that there's the lower cartouche and the upper cartouche. Here's the realist, here's the noticer in Mary, that she has to get this in. One is the actor's name and one would be the painter's name. So let's take a look at the third slide and just check out the three Taoist immortals contemplating deer. Now this is tough to see on this slide, but there are the three figures, and the blobs that you see below them are the forms of the deer. The Taoist immortals contemplating deer, symbols of auspiciousness and blessings and perhaps freedom. So here's a painting by a woman seeking imagery of experience, strength, longevity, and who had also begun to separate motherhood from female identity. Though the fact that she had no children left her barren in her natalist world, and perhaps lessened in the eyes of her husband, not being a mother freed her into a world she could remake. I mean, did she? I'm wondering, Renee, if you could flip back to the image of the whole painting. Great. Thank you. Thanks for being the theatrical director here. So I was wondering, you know, as she's working out this composition, does she realize that she can take her husband away? She can lift him out of this student adulation, away from Mary Ridge, and disengage from all the complicated vectors of loyalty that they had, because soon she would turn up a job for herself. She would use those marvelous writing skills to make a travelogue of Spain with George as her illustrator. And so as she worked on this canvas, she was making more than a painterly arrangement. She was making a marital one, because suddenly George Reid up and took a leave of absence from his job. The couple left North America for Spain, and the painting here, you can't see how she signed it, but she signed it M.H. Reid. She never left that H from her name. Signing gives a person power. A name gives a person power. It's the engine to interpret your own internal being to the world. And Mary Hiester Reid's brilliant legacy gives us the emotional atmospheres of one woman as she determines to arrange her life, even, as the story goes, from beyond the grave. So thank you, Renee, for inviting me to speak about these paintings, and thank you for working the slides so gracefully. I also want to thank Georgiana O'Yorick for her vision for women painters at the Art Gallery of Ontario. Mary Hiester Reid would have been grateful to see her work on the walls 99 through 100 years after her solo exhibition here. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you so much, Molly. It's a pleasure to hear you speak. We really appreciate it. So Mary Hiester Reid's work takes up half of the exhibition, and the other half is taken up by Helen McNicoll. And I am going to speak about 3 of her paintings today. I'll do an introduction about her first. So here she is in 1906 in her studio in St. Ives. She is Canada's most widely acclaimed impressionist, who was a woman. She was born in 1887 in Toronto to a wealthy family and grew up in Montreal, where she started painting. At the age of 2, she contracted scarlet fever and lost her hearing. She was encouraged by her parents to pursue a career in art and studied at the Slade School in London, England, starting in 1902. And the Slade School was a very progressive school renowned for its equal treatment of students, both male and female, which was rare at the time. McNicoll began her career at a key moment for professional women artists. The suffragette movement, was in full swing, and the role of the woman artist was changing. And McNicoll's art really reflects that. Her landscape, figurative, and still life paintings are more disruptive than they may seem at first, and we will get into that later. After studying in London, she traveled to artist colonies in England and France, where the influence of Impressionism and painting en plein air, or outdoors, was very popular. She stayed in Europe for the rest of her life, although she traveled back to Montreal to see family and to exhibit artwork. And when McNicoll died in 1915, unexpectedly at the age of only 36, she was on the verge of major recognition. So we will start with an early work. This is called The Little Worker from 1907. And this was painted when McNicoll was about 20 years old. It shows a young girl descending a hill, a grassy hill, and she's at work. She's holding a bucket that might be filled with chicken feed. As you can see, there are 3 chickens trailing her. And what is really interesting about this canvas is the unusual perspective. So the viewer is situated at the bottom of the hill and looks up at the girl as the landscape rises up behind her. Both the viewer and the girl are immersed in this very luminous yellow space that is a sunny field. And the horizon, if you can see it, is at the very top left of the picture. This type of composition originated with the French Barbizon school. They would reverse traditional landscape imagery and provide this uninterrupted vista that, again, was very immersive for the viewer. Here you can see a detail. This is the bottom edge of the painting. You can see the way she's rendering light and shadow with pure color. It's very vivid. You can feel the warmth of the sunny day, and you can almost smell the grasses and hear them rustling. Here's another detail. McNicoll often painted rural scenes with children playing and women at work on farms. Here you can see she takes an unsentimental approach that neither idealizes nor dramatizes the scene. The girl is concentrating on her work and her eyes are not meeting the viewer's gaze. In many paintings like this one, McNicoll portrays the allegory of the modern woman. She is independent and industrious, which was true of McNicoll herself. She occupied an important role in the widening network of international artistic exchange in the early 1900s. And there was a wave that brought international styles and subject matter to Canada. McNicoll's contribution was that of pure impressionism, broken brushstrokes, a plein air technique, luminous color, and comparisons to French painters such as Monet, Pissarro, and Sisley. However, she is more aligned with English Impressionism than French. Her instructors at the Slade School were some of the best practitioners of English Impressionism. And yet she was Canadian. Art historian Christina Uno writes beautifully about this, that McNicoll was a colonial outsider in the imperial center. She was simultaneously home and away, a positionality that may well have been a challenge for her. All right, moving on to our next canvas. This is a small painting called Interior, and I know that Molly loves this painting, and so do I. This is from 1910, so 3 years later. It shows a bedroom with sun filtering in through a window. And what I really love about this painting is that it's so lived in and messy and intimate. And the subject really is light and the artist's treatment of light as it hits the sheer curtains, the mirror, and the carpet. Your eye really dances through the composition, picking up on different treatments of light. This again is the bottom edge. We can feel the presence of a woman here, even though she's absent. There are vague impressions of footprints on the carpet, and there's a robe tossed aside that suggests that the woman has either just left the room or maybe she's still in the room. Here you can see a pillow that's kind of tossed aside. That means maybe she just woke up and hasn't made the bed yet. And the mirror gives an expectation that she might appear, but instead it reflects a blank light. Even the rocking chair seems to hint at the presence of a body and the way it's rocking back under the weight of the robe. The bedroom is usually a private and intimate space, and at the time, private spaces were considered feminine, and of course, public spaces were considered masculine. However, by holding back clues about who occupies the room, the painting presents a more complex understanding of private spaces and of femininity. And the third painting I'd like to discuss is The Open Door from circa 1913. And this is a larger painting. It's about 76 by 64 centimeters. Here again, we see McNicoll painting the figure. It was painted in a cottage in St. Ives, an artist colony where McNicoll and her friend, companion, and fellow painter, Dorothea Sharp, spent several years painting and studying. We can see a dazzling view through a door where her typical impressionist treatment of foliage contrasts dramatically with the muted tones of the interior. The door seems to be beckoning the woman to go outside. The woman has a look of concentration on her face. She takes her work very seriously, and by extension, we can feel that McNicoll does as well. The mirror, candle, and kettle emphasize the domesticity of the interior, yet there is a lack of reflection. Is Sharp actually there, or does it mean that she occupies a space that has become empty to her? Like the previous painting we looked at, there are signs of ambiguity here. The door is a threshold motif pointing towards a liminality. We're not sure about her activity. There's imprecision. Is she sewing, darning, or embroidering? There's also ambiguity in the mirror reflecting an empty light that harmonizes with the gray of the fabric and the walls. The use of gray itself is also ambiguous. It is at once no color and all colors, both empty and full. The woman's standing position is unusual. It seems like it would be tiring. And she's not a woman settled, but she is engaged in activity. So we get the impression of, maybe she just started or she's just finishing so she can go outdoors. I feel that she's really keeping us on our toes. On the back of the door, you can see a house coat or a painter's smock. Again, hinting towards the question of perhaps she's about to leave or maybe she's just arrived. Art historians have said that these sorts of disjunctures in McNicoll's work signal the ways in which she, as a deaf woman, may have felt cut off from mainstream culture. Although she was proficient in lip reading and she was exceptionally integrated into hearing society, she went to a really great school, she played piano and attended professional association meetings, she traveled extensively. There is a notable sense of detachment in her figurative works that must not be ignored. They are observations of stillness and absorption. However, they are also about movement. Fabric flaps in the wind. Light is rendered dynamically with broken brushstrokes. To me, the distance or detachment is psychological. And I ask myself, is this a result of McNicoll's own experience of the world, living the intersectionality of a deaf woman and a Canadian impressionist, and an expat living in England? I'd like to close with a note about the person in this painting, who is Dorothea Sharp, again, the companion and fellow painter. She appears in several of McNicoll's paintings and was an active suffragette. One interpretation of this work is that Sharp's white dress is actually the typical suffragette uniform, not a symbol of feminine purity, which you might think of when you see a white dress. Another thought is that the fabric she's working on is not a domestic object for home, but a commemorative handkerchief often stitched by members of the suffragette movement. Through this lens, the woman is neither a passive or aesthetic object. She is a contemporary woman, invested with authority and self-sufficiency, rather than aiming to please male viewers. As Christina Uno writes, femininity does not reside straightforwardly in the world that McNicoll envisions. And that is clear in this and all three of the paintings we've looked at today. So I will leave it there, and I'll stop sharing my screen. There you are, Molly.
Here you are, Renee.
Well, this is the first time we are comparing these two artists, which is kind of exciting.
Oh, it is.
Go ahead. Do you have some notes on the comparison?
I just have some, just an observation or two, just from that first painting, how much weight McNicoll gives that pail, because the girl has her arm out, you know, she's balancing herself, and just by painting the girl's arm out, we feel the weight of the chicken feed in that pail, or whatever it is that she has in it. And I was thinking, well, of course, those are impressionist strokes, colors side by side, which is not what Mary did. Mary was a blender, but still, I think that Mary would have enjoyed that pail and perhaps wanted to paint it herself. She loved painting metal in those silvery colors, and also I think she really would have attached to the open door. Excuse me while I get rid of that.
That's Zoom life.
Yes, just a little Zoom interference. Those grays, I think, would really have appealed to her in the open door as well.
Absolutely. One thing that struck me was when you were talking about Mary Hiester Reid as an artist working within the confines of what was accepted for a woman. So she was, you know, working mostly in the flower genre, and I look at McNicoll working in traditional genres of landscape, of painting women, and both of them were still able to make statements about female authority and autonomy, and I think that is, to me, what is so fascinating, is that they're both, you know, at first glance now they might seem traditional, but in fact, they were both quite radical.
These are, I mean, you wouldn't say it by, you wouldn't, if you were just brushing past these paintings, you'd think of them as traditional, but in fact, they are radical acts, and these women lived radical lives. So that it makes me think of a poet Mary Hiester Reid might have read, I think did read, Wordsworth, who said, "Nuns fret not at their narrow convent walls." And there's a way in which, once you have that set of constrictions, you can infuse it with your own energy. You can appropriate the limits of the tradition that you're given and use it with your own energy. And both of those women were using that. So there's an excitement, there's a certain kind of electricity in what at first glance looks like a staid work, but is not.
Absolutely. Molly, maybe to close, I will ask you about the painting that's hanging in the top left corner of your screen.
That is, I'm wondering if I could possibly bring my computer over there. I don't know whether you can see it anymore there, but it's a painting. It's a painting of three roses. another triangulation, 3 roses in another milk jug, as a matter of fact. And I feel so lucky to be able to have it on my wall behind me. She's got my back, and it's a great feeling to know how productive she was, and how forgotten. But this is for all of us who fear being forgotten. There are those of us now who remember her and are very happy to do so.
Absolutely. Well, Molly, I, for one, am so excited to read your biography of Mary Hiester Reid. So we will look out for that in the nearish future.
Mhm.
And I would like to encourage everyone who's listening to visit the AGO sometime. And we've just opened on the first floor in the Fudger Rotunda, the open door paintings by Mary Hiester Reid and Helen McNicoll. And we plan to have that on view for about 1.5 years. So there's lots of time to enjoy and to become familiar with the works. And I hope that you do come and enjoy them. So thank you so much, Molly. Such a pleasure.
Thank you, Renee. It's been a joy.